10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, Episode 30. Hey everybody, and welcome back to episode 30 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. I can't believe that we are in the 30s, but I just want to thank all of you that have been listening and supporting the podcast. It really means a lot to me that so many of you tune in every single week and, want to be the best jazz musician that you can possibly be. So this week is our lick of the month for August 2016, and we're going to be looking at a great Charlie Parker 251 and really ripping it apart and seeing what makes it so amazing. So before we get into the episode, I want to mention that you can go to our website and find a lot of really cool stuff there. Our blog is updated every single week, and there you can find the store, which is a bunch of great ways to support the podcast, keep it going, show your support in terms of buying some of our products, and you get something great in return. We've got transcription packs, we've got foundational exercises for the improviser, and we've got a new saxophone method book called Comprehensive Saxophone Warm-Ups, which I have just come out with recently. So if you're a saxophone player, please go and check that out. You can find that all under the store tab. And our website is really a cool meeting place for us, and we encourage you to go and check it out. Whether you're new to the podcast or you are a veteran that listens to these every single week. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's jump right into the episode. So as I mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at a Charlie Parker lick this week. And Charlie Parker, as most of you probably know, is basically the father of modern jazz. He really took us from the swing era into a more modern state of playing jazz. He founded the style of music called bebop, which I'm sure that most of you know already. But again, if any of you are beginners or don't really have a firm grasp on jazz history, he really, brought jazz music into what it really is today. And all modern jazz styles basically take their cue from bebop. So unfortunately, you can't really be a jazz musician without studying this form of music. So what we're going to look at today is a 251 lick from his solo on Au Prévave, which is one of his famous blues tunes. It's in the key of G. Of course, I always do this in the key of the tenor saxophone, but as always, I want you guys to put this into all 12 keys, so it doesn't really matter what key I'm actually showing you the lick in, because you're going to be putting it into all 12 keys ultimately. So I want to start by actually just playing the line for you, and then we're going to kind of tear it apart measure by measure and, like I said, see what makes it so great and pull some of the concepts out of it that could be useful to you in the future. So here's what the lick sounds like in its original form. So the first thing that we notice in this line is not specific to any one measure, but I want to draw your attention to the rhythmic variation in this line. You'll notice that he uses eighth notes, eighth note triplets, 16th notes, and then the line resolves on quarter note triplets. So we can already see that this goes into making a great line. You need that rhythmic diversity. You don't need it in every single line that you play, but being able to fluently go back and forth between, let's say, triplets and eighth notes, that's a really, really important thing for an improviser to be able to do. And Charlie Parker was the master of that. Now, 16th notes are a little bit harder because 16th notes are what we call double time, and that takes a pretty high level of skill to be able to pull off well. But this line is a great way to start getting some 16th notes into your playing. So that's the first thing I notice about the line as a whole, is that the rhythmic diversity of it and the way that the rhythms fit together really make for a very compelling line, and something that you would want to imitate very much. So now let's get into the real harmonic nitty-gritty of exactly what's going on and the devices that Charlie Parker is using. So let's look at the first measure. We have an A minor 7 chord. And if you look at the first half of the measure, basically what he's doing is he's outlining a bunch of chord tones. Now, I'm considering the ninth to be one of the chord tones because that's the next extension after the 7. So you might be a little bit confused when you go, oh, he's talking about chord tones, but there's a 9 in there. Well, I'm considering a 9 the first extension and one of the chord tones. So he starts on the 5th, jumps down to the 9th, and then goes right up 3, 5, 7. So that's basic outlining of the chord tones. We all know how important chord tones are, and if you don't know how important they are, go back and listen to our episode on chord tones and get a little bit of that in your playing. So on beat 3, we see another triplet, and this is where Charlie Parker starts to incorporate some chromaticism into his playing. And this is one of the parts of the line that you might be wondering about, because he actually uses the major third over a minor chord, which is usually a big no-no. But let's look into that a little bit deeper. It's actually okay for you to use the major third over a minor chord as long as it is a chromatic passing tone. So you can see on beat 3, he goes from the 9 up to the 3, then to the major 3, then directly to the 4 or the 11, however you choose to think about it. So we barely even notice that it's an extremely dissonant note. You know, the major third over a minor chord is about as dissonant as it gets, but our ear doesn't get a chance to latch on to that because we're immediately going to a note that's actually inside the key, which is the 11. So there's a lesson in itself for you right there. You can use any non-harmonic tones that you want to, as long as they are passing tones or approach tones that are leading to a better note. So that's basically our first measure. We have the outlining of the chord tones. We have chromatically going up from the 9 to the 11. And then we come back down to the 9 again. Now we're in the next measure, which is over a D7 chord, which is the 5 chord of the 2-5-1. So let's look at what's going on here. There are some alterations in this chord that he uses that would be really cool devices for you to get into your playing. So he starts on the 7, then he jumps down to the 11, then he goes to the flat 9, which is that E flat that you see over D, down to the major 7, and then resolves that to the root. So this is what we call encasement, if you've never heard of this before. Basically what he's doing is he is taking the root and he's preceding the root by playing a note a half step above it and a half step below it, and then ultimately circling that root before he lands on it. So again, this is another case like over the minor chord where normally you don't really want to use the major 7 over a dominant chord. It doesn't really sound that good. It's very dissonant. But the fact that he's using it in a chromatic concept and ultimately it's going to the root on the strong beat, which is beat 3, it sounds great. And it really has the effect of leading you to that root note rather than sticking out as a major 7 over a dominant chord. Then on beat 3, we see him go to the root, down to the dominant 7. Then we get our 16th notes. And there's two different ways to think about these 16th notes. I'll mention them both. If you want to think about it inside the key, you can think about it as 13, 1, 3, 5. Those would be the numbers over the D7 chord. Another way to think about it is that shape, B, D, F sharp, A, is also a B minor 7 chord. So you could think about it in two different ways. You could think about it strictly with the numbers, which I would suggest doing at first. But then I also want you to notice that he's using a B minor 7 chord, outlining it over a D7 chord. So that is very much available to you as a different way of thinking about things. All the notes in that B minor 7 chord, they work over D7. So if you're looking for different shapes, different arpeggios to play over different chords, that one really works. So a minor 7 chord based off of the 6 or the 13 works really well over a dominant chord. Now we get to our resolution point. We get to the 1 chord. And this is really, really simple. He basically just plays 1, then down to 5. But what's really, really cool about this is the rhythmic fashion that he does it in. So we get this flurry of eighth notes and eighth note triplets and 16th notes, and then all of a sudden when he resolves it, he goes to a quarter note triplet, which really gives us a nice difference from what we've been playing before. It gives us that contrast between all the fast notes that have been flying by us and gives us a nice spot to land. So that's about it. I mean, there's so many different concepts that you can learn from that 3-measure line that it could keep you busy for a couple of months if you really, really were to tear this apart and use some of the devices that he's using. Write your own lines with some of these similar devices, and that can really personalize it for you and add a little bit of your own voice to it. But before you do all that, what I really suggest doing is memorizing this particular line verbatim in all 12 keys. Then you can start becoming a little bit more creative with it. I was talking about that with one of my students this week, is that before you can get those creative juices flowing, you really need to learn what the masters have done before and frankly leave the creativity out of it for a minute and just learn the mechanics of what's going on before you can ultimately be creative. And you'll actually end up more creative if you ignore creativity for just a little while. So that about does it. If you guys have any questions about this line, want to get a little bit deeper into it, learn a little bit more about the process of becoming a better bebop musician, you can always get to me for Skype lessons. I absolutely love working with students. I have a bunch of materials that can get you better at bebop in a short period of time. Like I said, bebop is what everything after it is built on. So if you haven't got your bebop stuff together, I highly suggest seeking out somebody to kind of show you that side of playing. It'll really improve everything that you do after it. All right, everybody, please go and check out the website. Support us through the store or through your donations. And if you have a minute, please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. We really appreciate it. We will see you all next week. Hope you enjoyed the episode and looking forward to the next one. Thanks a lot, everybody.